I've currently seen a few praying mantids in my yard, and it came to the point where I decided to catch one. And that's why I made this glass box into a praying mantis ecosystem. Make sure to stick around to see the finished result. I started with the glass box. I got this one at a yard sale for free. It has cracks and crevices in it, so I decided to silicone it. Make sure you're using 100% silicone or just aquarium branded silicone. I then added a generous amount of silicone to cover all the cracks and crevices that would leak water later. Here's how it looks now that the silicone's in there. That piece right there would be annoying after I made the ecosystem, so I decided to take it off. It took a little bit of twisting, but I finally got it. It's a very interesting piece. I don't know what I'd use it for. There was a few spots of silicone on the glass that I didn't want, so I picked them off. Now that all that's done, it's time for the drainage layer. This is where excess water sits in the terrarium, just to keep the substrate from turning stagnant. Which, if the substrate did turn stagnant, that would lead to the terrarium's death. I'm just spreading the drainage layer out so there's no high or low points. I forgot to mention that I used pea gravel for this, but you can also use leca or other small rocks. Now it was ready for the substrate barrier. As you might have guessed by the name, it prevents the substrate from getting into the drainage layer. Or it's a barrier for the drainage layer. I cut it down to size with some scissors. Perfect. I sprinkled charcoal on top of the substrate barrier. It purifies the air inside the terrarium. It's time for the substrate. I'll put my mix on screen. Even though my substrate mix includes charcoal, I still like to add charcoal on top of the substrate barrier. I'm sloping the substrate up to the back for some depth. I gave the substrate a light spray down so that it would stay in place while I add the hardscape and other things. Now I'm adding some hardscape. I found this cool piece at a reptile show, but a cheaper way is just to look outside. Now I'm super gluing some moss to the hardscape. Note that the super glue is plant and animal safe. I'll be putting links to most of the things I used in the description. If you're wondering what the names are to the mosses I use, I don't know because I get most of them outside. But if somebody could identify the mosses I use, that would be pretty cool. Now I added the hardscape to the glass box. I decided to change the position of the hardscape because it didn't fit well. Now I'm going to add moss to the bottom. Again, if somebody could identify these species, that would be awesome. This is moon moss. I use it for a lot of backgrounds in my terrariums. It looks good to use different variations of moss. It just looks a bit more natural. Now I'm just filling all the gaps I missed with more moss. I gave it all a light spray down so the moss could rehydrate. I added more vertical hardscape because the animal I'm going to put in here is arboreal. Real quick, while you're here, why not consider liking and subscribing? It really helps out. I added super glue in between the two pieces of hardscape so that it would stay together later on. I added another piece of hardscape to the back just to make sure the praying mantis had enough climbing space. Now it's time for the leaf litter. I broke the leaf up into pieces so that I would fit the scale of the build more. It doesn't really matter where you put the leaf litter, but I just put it wherever looks good to me. I then added a ficus pumila corsifolia. Hopefully over time it creeps up the wood hardscape. I also added another one. The terrarium was beginning to look more natural each piece of leaf litter I put in there. I was almost done. For more detail, I added this acorn cap to the foreground. This is something I should have done a lot earlier, but to prevent the praying mantis from escaping, I siliconed mesh on top of those little gaps. To be honest, these gaps are kind of handy because they work as ventilation. I made a little bit of a mess with the silicone, so I wiped it down. After that, I put on the mesh. There were still little gaps, so I added more silicone. And I did this about 3 more times. I then gave the enclosure a heavy spray down. The ecosystem wouldn't be complete without the springtails. It was now complete. I'll wait for the ecosystem to settle in before I add the praying mantis, which I'll do in another video. Note that this is a temporary setup for the mantis. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you go and get your own little pet too.